The cat hissed like a kettle left on the stove too long, eyes wide and pupils blown into black saucers of warning. Her back arched, tail puffed to twice its size, claws out and ready. The exam room lights buzzed overhead, casting a sterile white glow on the chaos unfolding atop the metal table. Dr. Kyron flinched, recoiling slightly. He was over 6 feet tall, blue-skinned, and wore the standard biotech wrap of the Varellan Veterinary Corps. His long fingers were elegantly jointed, designed for delicate procedures on fauna across the quadrant, not for dealing with a furious domestic feline. "She is defective," Kyron muttered in his gravelly Varellan accent. One of his secondary arms reached toward the restraint kit on the wall. "Agitated. Possibly rabid. Sedation is recommended." "She's not defective, she's scared," said Patrick Neely, stepping between Kyron and the table with the kind of reflexes only a man who'd grown up around ranch cats could possess. He wore a faded green hoodie and jeans that had seen better days. The hoodie had a paw print logo from the local animal shelter. "You try to muzzle her, she's gonna freak even more. This is standard containment. For safety. For yours, maybe. But trust me, you try to force her into anything, you're gonna need more than gloves." He reached into the snack pouch clipped to his belt and pulled out a small, crinkly bag of treats. "Watch." Kyron blinked all 4 of his eyes. Patrick opened the bag with a soft rustle and held it low. The hissing paused. The cat, still crouched, looked toward the sound. Patrick didn't speak, just waited, motionless, like he'd done this 1,000 times before. The cat sniffed, took a step, another. Then, slowly, she climbed down from the exam table and cautiously approached Patrick's hand. "See? Treats instead of force," Patrick said. Kyron looked genuinely baffled. She was preparing to attack. Now she is. Calm. Yeah, that's what trust looks like. Behind them, a nurse assistant, a young woman named Tria from the Veskin sector, peered around the doorframe with wide eyes. "Doctor, your neck was almost scratched open." "But it was not," Kyron answered, still watching the cat as she gently batted at Patrick's fingers and accepted another treat. Patrick gave her a soft head scratch. "She'll let you check her out now. Just go slow." Kyron approached cautiously. The cat eyed him, but didn't hiss again. "Her name's Cabbage," Patrick added. "Don't ask. My niece named her." "Cabbage," Kyron repeated. "A vegetable?" "Yeah." "She's not a fan either." Kyron reached out with a diagnostic scanner, moving slowly. The skin beeped softly. Cabbage twitched, but didn't bolt. "You see now?" Patrick said. "Force usually just escalates things. Especially with cats." Kyron took a step back, recalibrating his understanding of Earth species for the 10th time that week. "I was told your species was impulsive, prone to aggression when threatened." Patrick chuckled. "Yeah, well, we've got our moments. But domesticated animals? You treat them like equals, they'll meet you halfway." "Why is she here?" "She's been limping for a couple days. Thought it might be a splinter or something worse. I volunteer at the shelter. Figured I'd get her checked." Kyron scanned again. "There's a minor puncture wound on her rear right leg. No fracture. Infection is beginning. She'll need antibiotics?" "Yes. Applied topically. I can demonstrate." Patrick nodded. "Go ahead." Kyron opened a drawer and pulled out a small applicator tube. He hesitated. "May I?" Patrick gave him the go-ahead, but Cabbage wasn't having it. She hissed again, swatting at the applicator. Kyron froze. She has changed her mind. Patrick reached into the treat pouch again. "Give me a sec." He offered another treat and gently rubbed near her injured leg. She allowed it, reluctantly. "Now," Patrick said. Kyron applied the gel swiftly. Cabbage flinched but didn't attack. "That's it," Patrick said. "Good girl." Kyron stepped back, the smallest hint of admiration creeping into his stiff posture. "This is not standard protocol." "Maybe it should be." Kyron stared at Patrick for an uncomfortably long time. "Would you consider teaching a course? We have a new interspecies handling program." Patrick blinked. "You want me to teach a bunch of aliens how to give treats to cats? To de-escalate mammalian aggression?" "Yes." Patrick scratched the back of his neck. "I'm not a vet. I just help out." "You are effective." "That qualifies." Patrick hesitated. "I'll think about it." But the next day, a shuttle arrived at the shelter. Patrick stood outside, arms crossed, watching as a small Varellan transport hovered down with a hum. The door opened to reveal Kyron and a short, pink-skinned alien with oversized goggles. This is lead trainer Visk. She is here to observe your technique. Patrick sighed. I guess this is happening. The shelter wasn't equipped for guests, so he cleared out the back room and turned it into a makeshift classroom. Over the next week, he demonstrated everything from slow approach techniques to distraction tactics using toys and scent pads. Visk took detailed notes, occasionally stopping to ask questions with a translator device slung around her neck. One afternoon, during a demonstration with a particularly grumpy tabby named Muffin, things got out of hand. Muffin had been contained in a soft carrier, but the moment the zipper came halfway undone, she bolted. Patrick lunged, missed, and crashed into a shelf of food tubs. He landed hard, one arm bent under him at a bad angle. "Aw, damn it," he groaned. Visk hurried over. "You were injured." Patrick tried to sit up, wincing. "Yeah, I think I landed on my wrist wrong." Kyrin scanned him. "Possible fracture. We must take you to medical." Patrick didn't argue. The pain was sharp, and he couldn't flex his fingers without gasping. At the medbay, they ran a scan. "Fracture in the distal radius," the technician confirmed. "You'll need immobilization and at least a month of reduced use." Patrick exhaled. "Great." He left the medbay with a lightweight brace around his wrist and a prescription for pain meds. Back at the shelter, he was grounded from any physical demonstrations. This took over, but her attempts to replicate his method lacked the subtlety and timing. The cats weren't impressed. "Let me coach," Patrick said from the corner, resting his arm on a pillow. "You're moving too fast. Let them sniff your hand first." Visk adjusted. "Like this. Closer. Not in their face. Think like prey, not predator." Kyrin watched silently, occasionally jotting notes on a data pad. By the second week, Patrick's wrist ached less, and he started using it gently. He still couldn't lift anything heavy, but he could guide Visk more effectively. "This is very inefficient," Kyrin commented during a break. "Yeah, but it works," Patrick replied. "You want results or speed?" Kyrin paused. "Results. Then let the cat set the pace." By the third week, Muffin let Visk pet her without flinching. Cabbage, now fully recovered, strutted around like she owned the place. Patrick stood beside Kyrin, watching as a new recruit tried the treat method with a skittish kitten. "This program's going to help a lot of shelters," Patrick said. Kyrin nodded. "I underestimated your species in this regard." Patrick smiled faintly. "We've got our strengths. Will you continue to assist?" "Yeah, just let me heal up first." Kyrin glanced at his wrist. "For more weeks." Patrick laughed softly. "You keeping track? You are the only instructor we have." Patrick shook his head. "Guess I'm not just the treat guy anymore." Kyrin didn't respond, but his gaze lingered on the now calm kitten as it purred in the alien trainee's arms. By the late afternoon of the following Thursday, the shelter smelled like damp fur, antiseptic, and the faint tang of heated plastifoam from the overworked heating unit. Patrick was seated cross-legged on the floor in the corner of the intake room, a half-empty cup of lukewarm ginger tea resting on his knee, his wrist brace propped against the wall beside him. He wasn't supposed to take it off yet, but the thing itched like crazy, and he'd negotiated himself a 15-minute reprieve. Opposite him, Visk crouched with exaggerated care, her thick goggles fogging slightly. A small rectangular carrier sat open between them, and inside was the newest arrival, an oddly silent calico with a coat smudged in uneven patches of ash and oil. Her name tag, still stuck to a melted collar, read Momo. She hadn't made a sound since she'd arrived 3 hours ago, even when her bedding had been changed or when Tria had gently wiped down her paws. "She's not reacting to anything," Visk said, her translator humming softly as it kept pace with her Vescan clicks. "The ears are not moving. The tail has not flicked. She's shut down," Patrick said. "Happens when they're overwhelmed. You ever seen a cat do that?" "No. We were trained to expect vocalization in distress. This is not that. She's past that." Patrick reached into the pouch at his side, pulling out a square of boiled chicken wrapped in wax paper. He unfolded it slowly, catching Momo's attention with the scent. One ear twitched. A small victory. He placed it just outside the carrier. Visk leaned closer, watching intently. "Why chicken?" "Because she won't touch kibble right now, and tuna makes the whole room stink." Momo didn't move. Patrick didn't push. He leaned back, sipped his tea, and waited. "Your species has a strange obsession with waiting," Visk said. "You say that like it's a bad thing. It is inefficient. Only if you're in a rush. I am. Patrick didn't respond. He just took another sip and nodded toward Momo. The cat had stretched her neck just far enough for her nose to touch the meat. She's coming back, he said quietly. Visk made a faint warbling sound, a Vescan sign of respect usually reserved for senior researchers. Patrick pretended not to notice. The door beeped and slid open with a hiss. Kyren entered, flanked by two unfamiliar Varellans in darker wraps, observers from the Central Council, judging by the gold tracings on their sleeves. They both carried flat, glowing tablets and moved with the silent confidence of those who rarely found themselves corrected. Kyren gave a brief nod. They are here to assess the program's scalability. Patrick didn't stand. He lifted his tea in greeting. Welcome to the floor. One of the observers blinked slowly. You are the human. Last I checked. The other tapped something into her tablet. You are not medically licensed. Nope. You were injured during an unsanctioned demonstration. Also true. And yet you continue to instruct. Patrick pointed at Momo, who had now emerged halfway from the carrier and was nibbling delicately at the chicken. That looked like failure to you. The first one looked puzzled. She was unresponsive. Now she's eating. That's progress. Visk stepped in. He achieved it with minimal input. I have not been able to elicit that behavior all week. The second observer tilted her head. This methodology is undocumented. Patrick shrugged. So documented. Kyren stepped forward. The humans' methods are unorthodox, but effective. We have reduced sedation rates by 47% in 3 weeks. The observers exchanged a glance. One made a note. Continue. We will observe further. They moved to the far side of the room and stood stiffly, watching without comment as Patrick gently placed another piece of chicken on the floor. Momo crept forward another inch. 2 hours later, Patrick's legs were numb, his tea long gone cold, and Momo was curled in a soft fleece bed by the heating vent. She hadn't purred, but she was blinking slowly at Visk, who had taken the position Patrick vacated to stretch his legs. You're good, he said, rubbing his knees. Better than you think. I do not understand the indicators, Visk admitted, eyes still fixed on the cat. You don't need to. You just need to pay attention. That is not the same. Patrick smiled faintly. Not even close. The next morning, a transport arrived from a station orbiting Calyx Prime. It brought with it a trio of animals not native to Earth, but surprisingly cat-like in behavior. They were called Urex, and they resembled elongated ferrets with tufted ears and semi-prehensile tails. The shelter wasn't equipped for them, but Kyren insisted it was part of the pilot exchange program. Patrick stood in the intake corridor with a clipboard and frowned at the Urex carrier, which was made of something that looked like semi-translucent coral. Inside, the creatures paced restlessly, their movements smooth and unsettling. So, Patrick said, not looking away, which end bites? They do not bite, Kyren said. Cool. Which end stings? Kyren hesitated. Right, Patrick muttered. We'll start slow. The Urex were more curious than aggressive, but their attention spans were about 5 seconds long, and they had a habit of climbing vertical surfaces if startled. Within minutes, one had scaled the shelving unit in the back room and was peering down at Patrick from the top like a smug gargoyle. You got a plan? Visk asked from the doorway. Patrick grabbed a folded towel and tossed it over his shoulder. Not really. I figured I'd improvise. He approached slowly, holding out one of the scent toys the shelter used for enrichment. The Urex sniffed once, then leapt onto his back and wrapped itself around his shoulders like a living scarf. Visk looked alarmed. Patrick froze. That bad? I do not know what that means. The Urex didn't tighten or hiss. It just clung there, its tail twitching. Patrick slowly reached up and gave it a gentle scratch behind the ears. It chirped. That's probably fine, Patrick said. The other two Urex, apparently emboldened, began to circle Visk's feet, coiling and uncoiling like sentient springs. By the end of the day, all three had accepted food, explored half the shelter, and identified the warmest spot under the window to nap. Patrick sat on a crate watching them with an expression of cautious triumph. They're not so different, he said. From cats? Visk asked. From anyone. The following week passed in a strange rhythm. Mornings spent with Earth animals, afternoons with alien ones, and evenings reviewing footage with Kyren and the observers, who had begun asking less about credentials and more about patterns. One evening, As Patrick was finishing up notes on a nervous terrier that had bonded with one of the Urex through the glass divider, Kyren entered holding a data pad and a frown. There is a request. Patrick didn't look up. From who? The Council of Adaptive Integration. They want to send more handlers. From other species. Patrick set the pad down. How many? 22. He let out a low whistle. That's not training. That's a conference. They will arrive next cycle. Patrick rubbed his temple. We're going to need more tea. The morning the delegation arrived, Patrick was elbow deep in a compostable litter bin, fishing out what he grimly suspected was the remains of a Urex lunch experiment gone wrong. He wore a short-sleeved shirt, the wrist brace finally off for good. His fingers were stiff, but usable again. Visk stood nearby, holding a clipboard and trying not to breathe through her nose. They travel from 5 sectors away, she said, glancing at the time display on the wall. Most have not encountered Earth species before. Some do not even speak standard. So we're hosting a multilingual, multi-species crash course in interstellar animal care, Patrick muttered. And the first thing they'll see is me dragging a half-digested sock out of a litter box. They will admire your commitment to sanitation. I wouldn't bet on it. The sock squelched as he dropped it into the waste bin. We need to lock the laundry room. They clone the access pad, Visk said. Apparently Urex enjoy cotton. Patrick straightened slowly, wiped his hands on a towel, and looked at the clock. How many are arriving? 22. His shoulders slumped. Right. They met the group in the intake hall. The delegation trickled in with the quiet disorganization of people and used to gravity, temperature, or each other. There were long-limbed Shurins who moved like manises, 2 thick-shelled Drevians who radiated heat and smelled faintly of cinnamon, and a pale, translucent being encased in a mobile gel tank who introduced itself via a vibrating interface pad as Null. Patrick blinked. Is Null aquatic? Null is semi-hydrostatic, Kyren explained, stepping in from the admin corridor. They require fluid suspension for organ cohesion. Right. So no holding the kittens. Correct. While Kyren gave the official orientation, Patrick led a few of the more curious trainees to the back room, where the cats were dozing under heat lamps. The calico, Momo, had taken to sleeping under the window with her chin tucked into a folded towel. She didn't stir when the aliens entered, but one of the Shurins leaned in too close and was promptly warned with a sharp, raspy growl. Patrick held up a hand. That's a warning. Back off, or she swats. The Shurin tilted its head. This is threat behavior? No, this is restraint. She's telling you to quit while you're ahead. Visk input the behavior into her notes. I have added a new category, pre-contact deterrence signals. You'll want a whole subfolder for cats, Patrick said. The rest of the day passed in a blur of introductions and minor catastrophes. A Drevian accidentally melted the edge of a grooming table. One of the Shurins had an allergic reaction to fur and had to be quarantined with antihistamines. A small quadruped from Velos attempted to herd the Urex like sheep, which ended with it being treed on a supply shelf by a particularly energetic juvenile. By dusk, the shelter smelled like wet electronics and burnt peanut butter. Tria, the Vescan assistant, handed out calming chews to the overstimulated earth pets while Patrick supervised a feeding rotation that resembled organized chaos. You still breathing? He asked Visk, who was perched on a stool, attempting to teach a Dravi how to hold a grooming brush without crushing it. Barely. They do not understand subtlety. You've got the patience of a saint. I am considering a transfer to a quieter planet. Perhaps one without vertebrates. Patrick chuckled and rubbed his temples. You think they're learning anything? They're attempting. That is more than I expected. By the 3rd day, some patterns had formed. The Shurins were quick learners but struggled with mammals. The Drevians had steady hands and gentle manners but were terrified of yowling. Null, surprisingly, had a calming effect on anxious animals. The rhythmic pulses of their fluid suspension tank seemed to lull the cats into a trance-like state. Patrick took notes between feeding times, one eye always on the Urex, who had begun hoarding shiny objects in a makeshift nest behind the storage lockers. On the 4th morning, Muffin, the notoriously temperamental tabby, escaped during a routine checkup. She darted under the main desk, over the printer, and launched herself straight onto the back of one of the Velos trainees, who promptly collapsed in panic. Patrick threw a towel over Muffin's head and scooped her up with practiced ease. You all right? He asked the trainee, who was still blinking rapidly. I have never been used as a launch platform. Patrick passed Muffin to Visk and offered the Velos his hand. Welcome to Earth. That night, they held a debrief in the break room, which had been converted into a semi-functional classroom. Patrick sat cross-legged on the floor, nursing a bruised knee from the morning's chase. Kyren stood beside a hollow display, cycling through footage from the day. We have seen measurable improvement, he said. Sedation rates have dropped further. Handling times are improving. Even Muffin allowed herself to be vaccinated. She was chewing the syringe, Patrick pointed out. She did not flee. That is progress. One of the Drevians raised a hand. Will there be certification at the end of this? Patrick looked at Kyren. We offering diplomas now. They prefer documentation. Visk nodded. I will design a certificate. Possibly with glitter. The next morning, Patrick arrived early to find Noel floating silently in front of the intake pins, watching a new arrival, a scrappy little tomcat with one eye and a half-missing ear. The cat sat motionless, staring right back. Patrick crouched beside them. That's Frank. He's been through some stuff. Noel's interface pad blinked. Frank has not moved for 7 minutes. He's evaluating you. Is that safe? Patrick grinned. As long as you don't blink first. Frank, apparently satisfied, stood up and walked to the food dish. Noel emitted a low, whirring sound that might have been amusement. By the end of the week, Patrick was exhausted, slightly limping, and coated in enough fur to knit a scarf, but every animal was fed, cleaned, and relatively calm. Even Cabbage, who now spent most of her afternoons draped across the windowsill like a sleepy emperor, had grown tolerant of the chaos. Kyren gathered the group for a final review. They stood in a semicircle in the courtyard behind the shelter, where the sun filtered through the transparent ceiling panels and birds chirped from a nearby tree imported from Europa's Arboretum program. You have completed the pilot phase of interspecies handling education, Kyren said. Your performance exceeded initial projections. Patrick leaned against the fence, arms crossed. You all did better than I expected. Nobody got bitten this week. Frank bit the Shuren delegate, Visk said. That was a love bite. The Shuren held up a bandaged appendage. Affection is overrated. Kyren continued. You will each receive certification. The program will be submitted for cross-sector approval. Additional facilities will be established. Patrick raised an eyebrow. You're expanding? The council agrees this model is viable. Your input, while unconventional, has been instrumental. Guess I'm a curriculum now. You are an asset. Patrick looked around at the tired, fur-covered, slightly traumatized but oddly proud group of aliens. Well, he said, welcome to animal care. As the trainees filed out, some lingering to pet Cabbage or exchange awkward farewells with the Urex, Visk approached him with a small data chip. What's this? A copy of the full training archive. In case you ever wish to replicate the program elsewhere. Patrick tucked it into his pocket. Thanks, but I think I'm staying here. She tilted her head. Why? He glanced at the cats, the aliens, the mess, and the slowly dissolving Urek nest behind the lockers. Because apparently, he said, this is where I make the most sense.